The night was dark, with no moon in the sky. The wind blew hard over the Roman camp, where hundreds of soldiers sharpened their swords, ready for yet another battle. But there was something different in the air. Something that not even the most experienced warriors could explain. General Gaius Valerius, a man known for his coldness on the battlefield, felt a restlessness he had never felt before. He had faced many enemies before, but that night, the enemy was invisible. The mission was simple: destroy a group of Christians hiding in the hills. For Rome, they were a threat to the empire, a weak faith that needed to be crushed. But just as the soldiers prepared to attack, something happened. A boom split the sky, and an intense light illuminated the night. High above, a cross shone as if it had been designed by the gods themselves. Terror spread through the army. Some soldiers fell to their knees, others looked to Gaius for orders, but not even he knew what to do. What was that? A divine warning? A sign that they were about to face something much bigger than Rome? What happened that night changed the history of the empire and the general's life forever. A man raised to serve Caesar, trained to kill in the name of Rome, suddenly found himself questioning everything he believed in. And worse, he realized that perhaps he was on the wrong side of history. This is the account of the day the Roman army witnessed the inexplicable. A day when fear, doubt, and faith met on the battlefield. And from that moment on, Gaius Valerius was no longer a general of Rome. He would become a symbol of something that not even the most powerful emperors could destroy. Before we start exploring the next topic, take the opportunity to make sure you are subscribed to the channel, because what follows is a series of incredible videos that will help you better understand the history of Rome and how it can inspire your personal journey. Don't miss any content. Preparation for battle. The Roman army was in a state of readiness, like a tiger about to pounce on its prey. Under the command of General Gaius Valerius, the greatest military leader of the time, the troops were positioned in an open field. Gaius Valerius, a veteran of many battles, looked at his legions with unshakable confidence. He knew that with yet another victory, the Roman Empire had expanded its influence even further. His eyes shone with the certainty that nothing could stop them. Gaius' legion was known for its immense strength and discipline. Men of all ages, with their shining armor and sharp swords, were ready to face the enemy. But what they were about to face were no ordinary warriors. They were a group of people who, in the eyes of Rome, were just a handful of believers in an unknown god, but who were growing in number every day. Christianity, with its promise of eternal life and its focus on a divine figure, was challenging the established order. Gaius Valerius, however, did not see this as a religion or a philosophy. To him, it was a direct threat to the absolute power of Rome. The city of Rome, with its enormous wealth and power, prided itself on having dominated the known world. The Romans worshipped many gods, such as Jupiter, Mars, and Neptune. All were under the protection of the emperor himself. The idea of a single god who demanded total devotion, with no room for other cults, seemed ridiculous and dangerous. The general was determined to stamp out this movement of faith. He believed that if Christians were allowed to flourish, they would weaken the empire. Christianity questioned Rome's authority, challenged its customs, and offered its citizens something that the imperial city could never offer: a promise of eternal salvation. This idea of an afterlife, unfettered by the limitations of the empire, terrified Gaius and other Roman leaders. In the field, the Roman soldiers were gathered under the supervision of the general, making the final adjustments to their armor and preparing their weapons. Gaius, his hand firmly on his sword, was giving his final motivational speeches to his troops. He told them that Rome was being challenged and that the mission was of great importance. If they won this battle, they would ensure the continuation of Rome's greatness for many centuries to come. Gaius' words were like fire to the souls of his men, who were ready for anything. The atmosphere was tense, with the sound of swords being sharpened and shields being adjusted. Even the veterans, accustomed to the sound of battle, could sense that something was different about this mission. this was more than just a physical fight, it was a war of beliefs. The Christians were not armed like the Romans. They did not have the power of Rome, but their ideas were spreading like wildfire in a dry field. The general ordered the troops to march towards the Christian camp, the last resistance to be defeated in the region. The road was long, but the soldiers, disciplined as always, advanced with determination. The weapons clashed against the shields, making a loud, steady sound, as if the earth itself was hearing Rome's step toward its destiny. As they marched, the soldiers couldn't help but think about what they were about to do. They were going to destroy a religion, but something in the air made many of them start to question whether they were doing the right thing. Some, even as young men, had heard of the ideas of Jesus and the promise of love and peace that Christians offered. But loyalty to Rome was stronger, and the fear of disobeying the commands of their superiors spoke louder. But Gaius Valerius had no doubts. For him, this was a life-or-death mission for the empire. He believed that if Christianity was allowed to spread, Rome would be threatened. He had seen what these new ideas could do to people, how they began to abandon their old ways and worship a different God who could neither be seen nor touched. This, to him, was chaos. Roman discipline, based on the worship of gods and military force, was being challenged. The general was determined to destroy this idea before it spread any further. He believed that the only way to ensure the safety of the empire was to eliminate Christianity once and for all. His legion was ready to do whatever it took, and he would show no mercy to anyone, whether old or young, male or female. They were a threat to the order of the empire and needed to be eradicated. As they approached the Christian camp, Gaius Valerius' men were impatient, ready to face whatever was necessary. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath the footsteps of the Roman legions, as if the camp itself sensed the violence that was about to unfold. Gaius was undeterred. He had a plan, and nothing would make him waver. He was a Roman leader, and his word was law. But deep down, something told him that this battle would be different. There was a feeling in the air, a strange energy that he could not understand. He did not know what was about to happen, but something told him that tonight's battle would be more than just a physical confrontation. Something was about to change, and Gaius Valerius did not know if he was ready for it. Before giving the order to attack, General Gaius Valerius and his troops were gathered, ready to march and face the Christians, who were in a small camp a few kilometers away. The battlefield was silent, but there was a tension in the air, as if something was about to happen. The sky, which was normally clear and calm, now seemed different. The wind, which until that moment had been gentle and pleasant, began to change suddenly. First, a light breeze passing through the trees quickly turned into strong gusts. The leaves began to sway violently, and the sound of the trees cracking under the force of the wind seemed like a warning, something strange and unexpected. The soldiers, who until then had been focused on their tasks, stopped for a moment and looked towards the horizon. The earth, which had been warm and dry, seemed to vibrate beneath their feet, and the skies, which had been clear, began to darken in an ominous way. General Gaius Valerius, who had always been confident in his ability to lead in difficult situations, looked up with a suspicious look. He knew that a storm was a possibility, but what was happening seemed much more than that. Clouds began to form rapidly in the sky, grouping together in an unusual way. They were not normal clouds, but dark, thick clouds that moved with impressive speed. There was something ominous in the way they grouped together, something that was not typical of the storms Gaius was familiar with. As the storm intensified, the general could not shake the feeling that something else was happening. The troops, normally unperturbed, began to exchange nervous glances. Even the veterans, who had already faced the harshest battlefields, were restless. The pressure in the air was palpable, as if an invisible force was manifesting itself. The storm seemed to be getting closer by the second, but the strangest thing was yet to come. Suddenly, in the middle of those dark clouds, a bright light appeared. It was not an ordinary lightning bolt or a normal storm lighting. It was an intense, almost supernatural light that cut through the clouds like a sharp blade. The sky, which had previously been gloomy, was now illuminated with a heavenly glow, a light that seemed to come from the very heart of the sky. It was as if the universe were opening up to reveal something beyond human comprehension. The light was so intense that it blinded the eyes, but at the same time, it seemed welcoming and full of meaning. In the center of this light, a figure formed, and as the image became clearer, everyone present could identify the symbol, the cross, illuminated with an intensity that no one would ever have imagined possible. General Gaius Valerius, who was accustomed to leading his troops with unwavering courage, was speechless. His soldiers were astonished. Never in their entire lives had they witnessed something so extraordinary. The cross shone in the sky, as if it were defying nature and destiny itself. It was as if the sky itself was manifesting itself to communicate something. The sound of the wind grew louder, and the storm seemed to grow. But the cross in the sky remained there, unchanging and shining. It was as if the earth itself was bowing before that image. Some soldiers knelt, not because they were ordered to do so, but because of something deeper. There was a sense of reverence, something that compelled them to look up, to look at the sky with a mixture of fear and respect. Gaius Valerius, the imposing leader who had always trusted in his strength and command, was now feeling something he had never imagined. He did not know what it was, but something inside him seemed to be touched. The light of the cross seemed to penetrate his soul in a way he could not understand. For a moment, he hesitated, his arm, which was about to give the order to attack, remained still. He did not know what to do. The reason that had always guided his actions was now in conflict with something much deeper. The troops, who had previously been ready to march, were now in a state of confusion. Some soldiers, still looking up at the sky, were beginning to mutter among themselves. "What is this? This is not normal. Is this a sign?" The general, normally firm and unbeatable, felt a sense of helplessness. He wanted to continue with the mission, but this heavenly sign seemed like something he could not ignore. What did it mean? Why now? Why before such an important battle? The storm continued to intensify, but the cross shone brighter and brighter. The light seemed to penetrate everything around it, illuminating the battlefield in a way that made it impossible to look away. The soldiers were divided. Some were beginning to feel an inexplicable faith rise within them, while others were still so focused on the mission that they could not understand what was happening. But everyone, without exception, was being touched by something they could not comprehend. Gaius Valerius, with a somber look, ordered the soldiers to remain in position, waiting for the storm to calm down. But what he didn't know was that this event was not just a storm. It was not a simple change in the weather. It was an intervention that would change the course of his life and the Roman Empire. The sky, which had previously seemed distant and indifferent, now seemed to communicate with him directly, as if it were challenging his certainties and beliefs. The general tried to maintain his firm posture, but something in his heart was beginning to change. He, who had always been so loyal to Rome, who had always followed Caesar's order with devotion, was now questioning everything. He was facing something greater than himself, greater than any empire or army. Something mysterious and divine was happening, and he knew that, deep down, his life would never be the same again. The light of the cross was not just illuminating the sky. It was illuminating his soul. Gaius Valerius had always been an unbeatable leader, admired for his strength and discipline. Known for his strategic ability, he commanded his troops with precision. His loyalty to Caesar and the Roman gods was unquestionable, and every step he took was aligned with the beliefs of the empire. However, the sight of the cross illuminating the sky caused his world to crumble. The general, who maintained a strong posture, faced something he couldn't understand. The bright light was mysterious, challenging his beliefs and loyalty, questioning everything he knew. As strong winds raged and clouds formed a storm, the cross seemed to be the center. Gaius felt a strange calm mixed with fear, as if the sky was speaking to him. He began to question his faith in the Roman gods and his strength from Caesar and Rome. The soldiers around him were equally perplexed. Gaius observed their expressions of doubt and fear. Those who followed his orders without question were now standing still, eyes fixed on the sky. Some muttered words of astonishment, others began to kneel. For many, it was a divine sign. For Gaius, it was a test of his loyalty. He tried to ignore the feeling, focusing on the battle, but something inside him was uncontrollable. His mind was at war, feeling divided, as if an invisible force pulled his soul. The battle he planned no longer seemed important. The cross, once distant, was now his sole focus. He repeated, "I am loyal to Rome," but the words lost weight. His loyalty to the empire was challenged, feeling called to something beyond Caesar and the gods. The sight of the cross was the starting point for something new. Gaius faced a profound dilemma. How could he abandon everything he believed in? He had always been a man of Rome, disciplined, never doubting the traditions and teachings of the empire. Yet, before the shining cross, he felt empty. It wasn't simple doubt, it was stronger, as if heaven called to him, offering a path he never imagined. The general felt fear of losing everything he knew, but also fascination, an irresistible attraction to the light. He looked at the soldiers and realized he wasn't alone in confusion. Many began to kneel, touched by the sight. They, like him, were touched by something beyond their understanding, something transcending the empire and the Roman gods. In the midst of this growing doubt, Gaius felt something in his chest that made him stop fighting the feelings that were taking over his mind and soul. It was as if he was finally hearing something he had never heard before, the call of a greater faith, of a deeper truth. He did not know how, but he felt that by following this call, his life would gain new purpose. Something inside him was transforming. He no longer wanted to be just a Roman general, a servant of Caesar's gods. He wanted something more, something that connected him directly to heaven. The general finally realized that his mission on the battlefield was no longer his priority. The real battle was taking place within him. He looked at the cross and felt an unexpected peace take over his being. Doubt and fear began to dissipate, and a sense of certainty took their place. He did not need to understand everything right now. He did not need answers to all his questions. But deep down, he knew that he could no longer follow his old path. His loyalty to Rome and the Roman gods no longer made sense. Something greater lay ahead of him. Without another word, Gaius Valerius turned to his soldiers. They were waiting for his order, but he did not know what to say. He wanted to shout, to command, as he always had, but now the words seemed empty. Then, in a softer voice, almost a whisper, he spoke, "The battle is lost for us." It was not a defeat in military terms, but a defeat of something inside him. He was giving up his loyalty to the empire and to Caesar's gods, but it was not a loss. It was a liberation, a step towards a new life. The soldiers looked at him in silence, not fully understanding. Some were still in shock at the sudden change, others with hope. But Gaius knew that his decision had been made. He was ready to follow a new path, a path towards the cross. He did not know what the future held for him, but for the first time, he felt an inner peace. He knew that his life would never be the same again. All that remained now was to follow this new calling, the one that heaven had placed before him. Gaius Valerius was no longer sure where this path would take him, but one thing he knew, there was no turning back. He was ready to abandon his old life and everything it represented. The cross in the sky was not just a sign, it was a new destiny. And he, Gaius Valerius, was ready to walk towards it. So, did you know how the Roman army became one of the most feared forces in history? But what if I told you that, in the midst of all this grandeur, one of his own generals made a decision that changed everything? Gaius Valerius, a man loyal to Caesar, knelt on the battlefield and turned his back on Rome for the sake of something much greater. Did you already know this surprising story? The repercussions of this act shook the empire and marked an era. Tell us in the comments what you think of this betrayal and whether you believe Gaius Valerius was a traitor or a hero. And if this topic intrigued you, don't forget to share your opinion here. Just imagine the scene. Gaius Valerius, the strong and tough general who never doubted his orders, was in the middle of the battlefield, with his soldiers ready to attack. They were all prepared, but deep down, Gaius' heart was divided. The vision of the cross in the sky was still in his mind, shining like a sign, something he could no longer ignore. He felt a strange peace, but also a very strong need to do something he would never have imagined. He knelt there, in the middle of the war, on the dusty ground filled with screams, and did the unthinkable. Gaius Valerius, the feared and respected leader, was now on his knees, as if he were surrendering himself to something greater than himself. He looked up to the sky and, in his heart, began to understand something that had previously seemed impossible. He knew that by kneeling, he was not merely making a gesture of humility, but accepting a new truth. The Christian faith, which until then he had thought of as a weakness, now seemed to be the strength he had been searching for. As he made this act of faith, something magical began to happen. It was not only Gaius Valerius who changed in that moment. Upon seeing their general kneeling, the soldiers around him began to question everything they had believed. Many of them, who until then had been loyal only to Caesar and the Roman gods, began to ask themselves, if the general, our leader, is changing, perhaps we can change too. Gaius' change was not something that was limited to him alone, but spread like a seed planted in the heart of each soldier. The soldiers began to look at each other with more curiosity. Some were hesitant, others seemed confused, but there was a feeling in the air, a different energy. It was as if the cross, which had once seemed so distant and strange, was touching the hearts of everyone around him. That scene of Gaius kneeling, his heart open to something new, was creating a silent echo among his troops. War, which had once seemed to be the only purpose, was now giving way to something more important. A silent revolution within each one of them. General Gaius Valerius, on his knees on the battlefield, was now an example to all his men. He was no longer concerned with winning battles on the battlefield. He was now fighting for the truth he felt deep in his soul. His conversion was not just an act of faith, but a symbol of profound change. And what Gaius did not know was that this change within him was beginning to inspire others. Perhaps without realizing it, he was planting the seed of Christian faith in his soldiers. Doubts began to arise in the minds of the men around them. How could they continue to fight for Caesar and the Roman gods, when their own commander, whom they had always believed to be unbeatable, was surrendering himself to a new faith? They looked at Gaius Valerius and saw something they could no longer ignore. True strength lay not in swords and spears, but in something he now embraced with his entire being. And that strength was the Christian faith. That cross shining in the sky now seemed to be the key to something much greater. Silence took over the battlefield. As Gaius Valerius slowly stood up, feeling a peace he had never experienced before, he looked at his men. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes said it all. They were seeing something they had never imagined they would see in a leader like Gaius. The transformation was not just in his words, but in what he had done there, with an attitude of pure and unreserved faith. The commander, now converted, no longer needed to command with the same harsh and rigid words. He was beginning to lead by example, showing his soldiers that sometimes true strength comes from within. From the heart, and not from outside, from orders or weapons. He knew it would not be easy, that the journey that began there would not be simple, but something inside him was certain, this was the right path to follow. In the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, under a sky burning with the orange hues of sunset, Gaius Valerius stood in the midst of the battlefield. He had been a namesake of strength and tactical cunning, leading his legions to victory after victory. The men under his command revered him not only for his strategic brilliance but also for his unwavering loyalty to Rome and Caesar. Yet, something had shifted within Gaius. It was subtle at first, a quiet stirring within his soul that no conquest could silence. While the clamor of swords clashing and chariots racing echoed in his ears, Gaius began to sense another call, one that grew more persistent with each passing day. It was a secret he had harbored for weeks, tucked away like a forbidden scroll. The teachings of a new belief had taken root in his heart, rippling through him with peace and purpose unlike any he had known before. Christianity, a faith alien to everything he had been raised to venerate, had begun to take shape within his spirit. He had encountered it unexpectedly while pursuing rebel forces on the outskirts of the empire. Amidst the chaos, Gaius stumbled upon a hidden enclave of worshippers. There, in the candlelit sanctuary, he witnessed their fervent prayers. Their unwavering hope as they faced certain doom before Roman might spoke of love, humanity, of a life after death, a stark contrast to the glory of the empire that demanded endless homage to its gods and promises of earthly legacy alone. Intrigue turned into fascination, and fascination into belief. Kneeling on the battlefield now, he felt the burden of his armor lessened. It was no longer Rome's invincibility that girded him. As the soldiers gathered in silence, a deep awe transcended. Some knelt, others looked on with veneration. His men, who once bore the Aquili with pride, began to embrace their leader's newfound conviction. One soldier, Marcus, with skin scuffed by warfare, leaned close, asking, "General, what now?" Gaius looked to the cross hanging from his neck, a replacement for the heavy medallion of Caesar's face he once wore. "We honor what transcends kings and empires," he declared softly but firmly. "We give ourselves not to men, but to the truth in our hearts." The transformation was inevitable and irrevocable. What stayed steadfast was his zeal, redirected now from conquest to unity and peace under a different banner. Whispers spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of officials beyond the battlefield. Gaius Valerius became both a beacon and a pariah. He prepared for the trials that would follow such a radical departure from Rome's path. Yet, as Gaius rose to his feet, it was not the world's judgment he feared. It was the silence when he would have to face himself and his God. "Come," he urged his soldiers. "There is a different victory to be won." And with those words, he led them not with the sword, but with the fervent resolve of a soul reborn. He was, from that day forward, a servant not to Caesar, but to the cross. The Roman army, huge and powerful, stood on the battlefield. The soldiers were ready to fight, as they always had been, with their armor shining in the sun and their spears sharpened. But something very strange was happening. They were watching their leader, the great general Gaius Valerius, do something that no one would ever have expected. He, the man who had always led them steadfastly, was now on his knees, his eyes fixed on the cross shining in the sky. He was no longer talking about Caesar or the Roman gods, he was talking about something new, a faith that he himself had discovered. The soldiers, who had always followed Gaius with total loyalty, were confused. They did not know what to do. How could they continue to fight for Rome, as they always had, when their own leader was doing something so different? Gaius' change felt like an earthquake, shaking the foundations of the army. Many soldiers were in doubt. They looked at Gaius, who was now on his knees, and felt a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and even fear. Some began to ask, what if he is right? What if this faith he speaks of is the true one? At the same time, other soldiers, who were still completely loyal to the Roman Empire, could not understand what was happening. For them, Rome and its gods had always been everything. They had been trained from childhood to believe that Rome was invincible, that Caesar was a god, and that the Roman deities were the only true ones. But now, faced with this scene of Gaius Valerius kneeling and accepting a new faith, all that seemed to be beginning to crumble. How could they go on with something so new and strange becoming so strong within their own army? Whispers began to break out among the soldiers. Some were beginning to question their own beliefs. Is Rome, with all its might and power, right? Or is there something greater than all this? They wondered. Others were in shock. How could they abandon their loyalty to the empire, which had always been their reason for living? For many, it seemed impossible. How could they turn their backs on Caesar and the Roman gods, everything they had known and believed in for so long? The Roman army, once a well-oiled machine of conquest and power, was now divided. There were those who still wanted to follow Gaius, those who were beginning to dabble in the Christian faith, and those who were firmly against any kind of change. Some soldiers began to approach the general, still wary, but sensing that he had somehow found something that called to them. Others, however, were moving away, afraid of losing their honor and loyalty to Rome. The situation was tense. The soldiers were divided, and it was creating widespread confusion. This was not just a battle on the battlefield, it was now a battle within, in the hearts and minds of the soldiers. On one side, they had loyalty to Rome, with all its history and greatness. On the other, there was the new faith that now seemed to be gaining strength within their own ranks, with Gaius Valerius exemplifying that perhaps true strength lay in something much greater than the empire. There were also those who simply could not understand. Why is this faith spreading? What is this cross? And what does it mean to us? They wondered. They had never been taught Christianity. Rome, with its greatness, was what they knew, what they believed was unbeatable. So to see their own general, the leader of the army, walk away from all that and surrender to something new, something unknown, left them at a loss. Even through all the confusion, there was a different energy in the air. Something was changing, but no one knew for sure what it was. Some soldiers were feeling that they might find something new in their lives. Others, however, feared that this was the end of Rome, that Gaius Valerius's change was the beginning of the end of everything they had ever known. They were being pulled in opposite directions, and this was creating a deep division within the army. It was as if the Roman army were now fighting two battles, one against their enemies on the battlefield, and one within themselves. How could they fight for Rome when their own beliefs were being challenged? How could they continue to fight for Caesar's honor when their leader was changing direction? There were no easy answers. There was only confusion and a great sense of uncertainty. The soldiers approaching Gaius were beginning to question everything they had been taught. Many of them, still wary, began to see the Christian faith in a different light. They were beginning to feel, however tentatively, a connection to something greater. Something that could not be conquered with swords or military might. They were beginning to understand that perhaps true strength lay in something they could not see but could feel in their hearts. The Roman army, which until that moment had been an unparalleled war machine, was now divided, and this division was creating something even more powerful, a silent revolution, a change in the hearts of the soldiers. Some were beginning to follow General Gaius Valerius on his new journey. Others were still afraid, but they felt that something inside them was changing. Even with the chaos, there was a new hope in the air. And the future of the Roman army, as well as the future of Rome, was now uncertain. Rome had always been a place of strict rules and absolute power. Emperor Caesar was seen almost as a god, and anything that went against this idea was seen as treason. So when the news that Gaius Valerius, one of the most respected generals in the empire, had abandoned Rome to follow the Christian faith, it was as if an earthquake had shaken the heart of the city. The senators, the military commanders, and even Caesar himself could not believe what they were hearing. How could a man so loyal to the empire turn his back on everything? People in the streets of Rome were talking about this in whispers. Some believed that Gaius had gone mad. A warrior like him, kneeling before a new faith? That's impossible, they said. Others, however, saw it as a sign of something much greater. If even a Roman general has surrendered to Christianity, is there something in this faith that we cannot ignore? They began to ask. Gaius Valerius' name was in every conversation, from the nobles to the slaves. The senators gathered quickly. For them, this was not just a religious issue, but a direct threat to the power of Rome. If such a respected general had abandoned Caesar, it could mean that others might do the same. What if more soldiers began to follow Gaius? What if Christianity became too big to control? In Caesar's palace, the tension was palpable. The emperor, accustomed to being obeyed without question, could not bear the thought that a man like Gaius Valerius could challenge the authority of Rome. He slammed his fist on the table and ordered messengers to be sent immediately. "Bring me Gaius Valerius," he ordered. The general disappeared, and no one knew exactly where he was. Rumors said that he was hiding among the Christians, protecting those who had previously been hunted by his own army. Meanwhile, in the humblest corners of Rome, Christianity was growing like never before. Before, it had been a persecuted faith, kept secret, but now, with a general like Gaius Valerius converting, many began to see this religion in a new light. People who had never been interested before began to seek to know more. If even a man who lived in the midst of war found something greater in this faith, perhaps we should pay attention, they murmured. The soldiers who had once fought alongside Gaius were also confused. Many of them were still in the army, but now they had doubts they had never had before. They wondered if they were fighting for the right thing. Was Rome really as invincible as they claimed? Or was there something more powerful than swords and legions? Some began to question their orders, and this caused discomfort among the commanders. The Roman army had always been a ruthless machine, but now cracks were appearing in that fortress. The priests of the Roman gods were furious. To them, what Gaius Valerius had done was unforgivable. If such a strong and respected man was beginning to follow this new faith, it meant that the old gods were being challenged. They demanded that Caesar take drastic action. "We cannot allow this plague to spread," they shouted in Senate meetings. "If we do not stop it now, we will lose everything Rome stands for." But there was a problem. The more Rome tried to contain Christianity, the more it grew. The story of Gaius Valerius became a symbol. Christians began to speak of him as an example of courage and transformation. He, who had once been one of the greatest warriors of the empire, was now seen as a man who found true strength not in war, but in faith. The streets of Rome were restless. Some wanted Gaius captured and punished. Others began to follow him in secret, wanting to learn more about this faith that was stirring the heart of the empire. Christianity, which had previously been considered weak, was now seen as something that not even Rome could stop. The fate of the empire was beginning to change, and all because of a man who dared to challenge the greatest power in the world. Before we move on to the next topic, I noticed that you haven't liked this video yet. This is super important because it helps YouTube share our content with more people, and so we can continue to bring you more information to help you. So don't waste any time, leave your like here, it's free and makes all the difference. Thanks. Gaius Valerius was no longer the great general of Rome. He did not lead the legions, he did not wear shining armor, and he did not carry the standard of the empire. Yet somehow his influence grew greater than ever. Once his name had been feared by Rome's enemies, but now he was respected and admired by those who followed the new faith. His act of abandoning the army and kneeling before the cross inspired people from every corner of the empire. Roman leaders tried to hide his story. They forbade anyone to speak of him, destroyed all mention of his name, and disowned his followers. But to no avail. The more they tried to erase him, the stronger he became. People whispered his story in marketplaces, in homes, and even among the soldiers who had once fought alongside him. If such a powerful general gave his life to this faith, perhaps there is some truth to it, they murmured. The Christians began to grow in number. Even though they were persecuted, they gathered in secret to pray and tell stories about Gaius and others who, like him, had given up everything to follow their new faith. What had once been a small group hidden in the alleys of Rome was now spreading far and wide. Christianity was no longer just a persecuted religion, it was becoming an unstoppable movement. the soldiers who had once fought under Gaius were divided. Many still followed Rome's orders, but a doubt was growing within them. "Are we fighting for the right side?" they asked. Some began to desert, fleeing to join the Christians. Others remained in the army, but secretly no longer believed in Caesar's power. The leaders of the empire were furious. How could one man have such an impact? They decided that Gaius had to be captured. Soldiers were sent to find him, but it was too late. He was already hidden among the Christians. Protected by those who now saw him as a true leader, Gaius lived in the shadows for years, preaching and strengthening the faith of those who had once been afraid. Rome did not give up. When Gaius was finally captured, the trial was swift. He was accused of treason and sentenced to death. For the empire, this was an example. If anyone dared to defy Caesar, they would suffer the consequences. But for Christians, it was the opposite. The death of Gaius Valerius did not erase his history, it strengthened it. On the day of his execution, the Colosseum was packed. The people wanted to see the former general face his fate. But Gaius did not tremble, did not beg for mercy, did not look at the soldiers with hatred. Instead, he raised his eyes to the sky and smiled. His faith was unshakable. And when it was all over, Rome thought it had won. But the truth was different. Gaius' story spread like wildfire. He became a martyr, a living symbol of the Christian faith. Where once only a few believed, now thousands followed in his footsteps. Christianity, which Rome had tried to destroy, had become stronger than ever. And many believed that the blood of Gaius Valerius had not been shed in vain, but rather the seed of a new era. The story of General Gaius Valerius teaches us that no matter how powerful an empire may seem, it will never be strong enough to silence the truth. Rome believed that it could erase the Christian faith, that it could stifle any idea that challenged Caesar's authority. But in trying to destroy Christianity, it only strengthened it. Every persecution, every execution, every attempt to silence this new belief only served to spread it further. What happened that night was not just an inexplicable event, it was a defining moment. The cross shining in the sky was not just a sight to terrify the soldiers. It was a sign, a message that not even the most disciplined army in the world could ignore. And most surprising of all, it was not strength, the sword, or fear that won that day. It was faith. But this is not just an old story. The same conflicts still exist, disguised in new forms. There are still those who try to rewrite history, who try to hide certain events, who do everything they can to prevent you from seeing beyond what they teach you. Just as Gaius Valerius was trained to blindly obey and only woke up when he saw the truth before his eyes, perhaps it is time for you to question everything you have ever believed. How many stories have been forgotten? How many names have been erased because they threatened a greater power? What else has been buried by time, waiting to be discovered? If Rome, with all its strength, failed to prevent the truth, imagine what else may be about to be revealed. Stay alert. The past hides more secrets than you can imagine. And sometimes, all it takes to see them is a moment of clarity, like the one that changed Gaius Valerius' destiny forever. Thank you for watching this far. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving the next content.